when you see the old building, it closed down on itself and it is not there anymore.
The whole side is collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
Welcome back, everyone, to the 9/11 Iceberg chart. If you haven't seen part 1 already, for whatever reason, click here at the top of the screen. You can go watch that. Let's get back into it, I suppose. Layer 4. Pavel Hlava North Tower footage. If you recall, I said that Jules Naudet captured the best-known angle of Flight 11 hitting the North Tower, but he wasn't the only one. Pavel Hlava was an immigrant construction worker, originally hailing from the Czech Republic, who was on his way to work at 8:46 a.m. As his car was passing into a tunnel, he was videotaping his surroundings to send back home to his family, as a postcard of sorts, when he inexplicably caught the impact of Flight 11 into the North Tower. It's hard to see in the fuzzy, low-quality original clip, but when you stabilize the image and center the Twin Towers, you can see a light-colored plane impact the World Trade Center. When the same stabilization is applied to clips of the South Tower impact, the planes are also more easily seen, thus confirming that Pavel Hlava was the only other human being to capture the plane on videotape. He's also the only person to videotape both the first and second plane impacts. The Naudet footage doesn't count because each impact was shot by 2 separate people. Hlava didn't even notice that he had captured the first impact until well after the fact. He didn't even notice the smoke that was there. It was only after his SUV exited the tunnel that he saw the North Tower on fire. As he watched from the streets, he again captured an incredible view of the second plane impacting the south side of World Trade Center 2. It was at this point that Pavel and his associates composed themselves and wisely got the hell out of there. They kept their eyes on the World Trade Center the entire time as they took a detour out of the city, and were just barely able to see the collapse of the second tower from behind a bridge.
Mike, stop, please. Para to dolu. Now, dumpster building.
The tape would remain in Pavel's possession for a year and was traded through his circle of Czech buddies. He, along with his brother, even attempted to sell the tape, but their poor English skills and their lack of understanding as to the significance of the tape meant that they would not succeed. Eventually, the tape was obtained by the New York Times and subsequently shown on ABC News exactly 2 years after it had been filmed.
A remarkable piece of video, and I should point out that it was provided to ABC News for free.
Sibel Edmonds. Sibel Edmonds is a former contracted translator who was hired by the FBI shortly after 9/11 because of her expertise with Middle Eastern languages. During her brief stint there, she discovered a backlog of untranslated documents from the summer of 2001, warning of a possible attack from Osama bin Laden. Quote, "There was general information about the time frame, about methods to be used, but not specifically about how they would be used. There were other cities that were mentioned, major cities with skyscrapers. She also saw incompetence and corruption in her department, which told her to work slow and keep her mouth shut, as it was all sensitive information."
The next day I would come to work, turn on my computer, and the work would be gone, the translation would be gone. Then I had to start all over again and retranslate the same document. Then I went to my supervisor and he said, consider it a lesson and don't talk about it to anybody else and don't mention it.
She reported her findings up the proper chain of command, but was subsequently terminated in the spring of 2002, less than 7 months after she was hired. Edmonds attempted to contest her firings in court, but the judge ruled to dismiss her lawsuit due to the FBI needing to disclose sensitive information. The Senate Judiciary Committee held unclassified hearings later that year, in which the FBI submitted numerous unclassified documents. In 2004, these documents were retroactively classified as top secret, and the Attorney General put a state secrets order on Edmonds to prevent her from pursuing her lawsuit any further. The FBI claimed that the real reason for her firing was because of poor conduct and because her actions breached security. Glenn A. Fine, the Inspector General at the time, later stated in a 2005 internal investigation that, quote, many of her allegations were supported. The FBI did not take them seriously enough, and her allegations were, in fact, the most significant factor in the FBI's decision to terminate her services. Rather than investigate Edmonds' allegations vigorously and thoroughly, the FBI concluded that she was a disruption and terminated her contract. Edmonds calls herself a whistleblower, and to this day she continues to fight for impartial, unbiased journalism. In 2011, she released a story on her website going into more detail on just how specific the summer 2001 warnings from foreign officials were. Quote, Bin Laden's group is planning a massive attack in the United States. The order has been issued. They are targeting major cities, big metropolitan cities. They will use airplanes to carry out the attacks. They said that some of the individuals involved in carrying this out are already in the United States. They are here in the US living among us, and I believe some in the US government already know about all of this. She now runs the website newsbud.com, which as of the time I'm writing this, is currently inactive. $2.3 trillion. The day before September 11, 2001, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld appeared before an audience and revealed that the Pentagon could not account for 25% of their own spending, adding up to $2.3 trillion unaccounted for, with a T. This was expressed as a serious threat by Rumsfeld, who pointed at outdated accounting systems as the root of the problem.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
But by the next day, the Pentagon bureaucracy had much more pressing matters to deal with. In the rush to finance the war on terror, more money was thrown at the Pentagon for defense spending, and their previous money woes were seemingly forgotten about. By the first anniversary of the attacks, the shell-shocked and bloodthirsty haze had begun to fade from the public's perception of the war effort, and more news agencies picked up the $2.3 trillion story to criticize heightened defense spending. And yet still to this day, we don't know what that money was spent on, and for an agency as powerful and as vast as the Pentagon, that usually isn't very good. People were understandably upset by this, and unfortunately, it's a bit of information that's been buried underneath the infamy of the 9/11 truth crowd. I'm not trying to blame anybody, but there are actual articles nowadays that label this fact as a conspiracy theory and tried to play apologist for the Pentagon suddenly being unable to explain where $8,000 for every person and child in America went. This is American taxpayer money. The Pentagon doesn't need to be defended on this. It's doing a good job of that on its own, because government transparency is important if you don't want this shit to keep happening. If an agency is going to ask for your tax dollars, you better make sure you know where it's actually going to. Ahmad Shah Massoud warnings. Ahmad Shah Massoud was the former Minister of Defense for Afghanistan and the then leader of the United Islamic Front for the Salvation of Afghanistan, the military alliance directly combating the Taliban. In an April 2001 speech given by Massoud before the European Parliament, Massoud claims that his intelligence officials gained knowledge about plans for a large-scale in the United States, and he used this as his justification to ask the Parliament for humanitarian aid for the people of Afghanistan. His claims come well before U.S. officials would catch wind of a plot later that summer. But just like their findings and the findings of Sibel Edmonds, Massoud's warnings were ignored. on September 9th, just 2 days before 9/11, Al-Qaeda assassinated him by detonating a bomb hidden in a video camera. Osama bin Laden claims he commissioned the killing of Massoud to appease the Taliban because of the imminent problems the 9/11 attacks would cause them. The Taliban denies any foreknowledge of the assassination. CGI Planes. So, there are a few out there on the internet who claim that no planes were actually used on 9/11. The plane-based apparently it would be impossible for an aluminum-clad plane to smash into and destroy a steel building. Therefore, any video of the first and second plane's impact was made using digital compositing, layering in a CGI plane over the background plate of the exploding towers. This theory falls apart so easily because in order to believe this, you have to wonder why the perpetrators, assumingly the US government, would even bother with making planes such a crucial part of the attack. Keep in mind, the towers getting hit wasn't the only thing that happened. They also had to the planes as well. If you were going to fake the planes, why not just make it a larger scale bombing plot similar to the 1993 bombing and save yourself the time needed to fabricate evidence? In a city with millions of civilian witnesses and hundreds of television cameras, it's hard to believe that faking the plane crash would have made it any easier for them. But assuming you needed the planes to be there, and you needed to fabricate all 73 known video angles of the plane, you'd also need to fabricate the 5 or so angles shown live on television all around the world. Live digital compositing just was not up to that level in 2001. Furthermore, these live shots are mostly taken from news helicopters, i.e. they're not stationary. Anyone who works in compositing will tell you it's a nightmare to try and motion track shots so they look convincing. And you're telling me these guys had to do it live in one take and coordinate it with the dozen or so other major news networks that were rebroadcasting it all? I call bullshit. Any of these so-called visual glitches are only seen as such by those with the inherent bias in their brains to begin with. To an impressionable few, this could look like a compositing error, where the plane's nose juts out of the side of the building, followed by a deliberate cut to black to obfuscate the error. But if one actually does what these people claim, compositing the plane to go through the building, you can see that the real nose expands and pushes outward. It doesn't stay the same shape as the ones we composited ourselves. It's clearly the explosion from the other side of the building. I know I'm spending a lot of time on this section, but this is genuinely upsetting to me. To claim that our government orchestrated the attack is one thing, but to imply that these very real people who were murdered aren't real is disrespectful, idiotic, and insulting to all of the real families that were affected by this. You are not looking for the truth when you post shit like this. You're just giving a bad name to everybody else. The asterisk is in reference to confirmed fake videos. A number of theorists who are also VFX people have tried their hand at creating a mock-up of a plane crashing into a building, because they think this gives their theory more credence. It doesn't.
He would only have proved one thing, that he could imitate the plane's impact using computer graphics. He would not have proved that the original shot was faked.
There are two in particular that stand out. The first is done up to look like an old CNN broadcast, with an F-16 smashing into a glass building comically labeled with the letters WTC. They literally had to spell it out for you on the side of the building. The text on the bottom tells of an imaginary scenario in which the F-16 and President Obama declares martial law on the nation. The seemingly random implication of Sam and the laughable idea of Obama imposing martial law, he didn't, marks this one as pure propaganda. But this other one is different. This one claims to be the first plane crash, and it's a very obvious fake. But it's very strange too. It has some really bad voice acting in it. Oh my god! Oh my... And it's also very clearly the wrong building that's getting hit. But then it starts to gradually zoom in closer and closer. And the pilot is some guy with long hair. It's also set to the house theme for some reason, but unlike the other one, there doesn't seem to be any clear reason for its existence. Who made this? The original upload only dates back to 2008 with a single phrase in the description. Watch it! What purpose does it serve? Was it just some crafty VFX wizard who wanted to showcase his skills? Or was it purposefully created to add to the proverbial bonfire of disinformation surrounding 9/11? Airline Put Options. This is apparently stock market talk. In the weeks directly before and following the attacks, unusual activity took place involving both American and United Airlines stock prices. Both companies saw a huge spike in puts, a form of stock trading that essentially bets on these stocks losing value. On September 10th, more than 80% of the orders for both airlines were put options rather than call options, or those betting the stock would go up. Obviously, after 9/11 and the subsequent grounding of all flights in the United States, these stock prices did indeed plummet. This calculates to roughly a $5 million profit for whoever called in that many put shares. The International Organization of Securities Commission called it, quote, the most important crime of insider trading ever committed. Who called in these shares? Initially, the FBI suggested that bin Laden himself made the calls through a chain of brokerage firms as a way to further benefit from the attacks. This might have been a promising lead that could have traced back to the big man himself, but unfortunately, yet not surprisingly, the case went cold. The 9/11 Commission report later went on to claim that, quote, investigation has found no evidence that anyone with advanced knowledge of the profited through securities transactions. So if the didn't call in the shares, who did? Passports. 4 passports of the CGI were found following the crash of all 4 aircraft on the morning of September 11th. 2 were found in the wreckage of Flight 93, belonging to Ziad Jarrah and Saeed al-Ghamdi. One of these passports belonged to Flight 11, Satam al-Sukam, which was picked up by a civilian and handed over to police shortly before the collapse of the towers. A 4th one, owned by Abdul Aziz al-Omari, another passenger on Flight 11, was also obtained from his luggage, which failed to make it onto the airliner from his connecting flight in Portland. According to the 9/11 Commission report, the passports from Flight 11 had been doctored in some way consistent with other al-Qaeda members, although the specifics were stated to be classified information. Those in the truth movement claim it is impossible and ridiculous for a paper passport to survive a plane crash, let alone 3 passports. But keep in mind, passports are not entirely paper. Most have leather covers and bindings, and the one page that matters, the one with photo ID, is usually kept in a thin plastic cover. This is the case with the passports from the CGI. In addition, with the amount of plane debris, office furniture, and paper ejected from the towers upon impact, it is absolutely possible that a passport could have survived. Look again at all these unscathed pieces of printer paper that litter the streets and the skyline. With Flight 93, that's more understandably questionable, given that the aircraft practically disintegrated upon impact with the ground. However, similar items were found in the wreckage, including singed pieces of mail, so a passport is not exactly outside the realm of possibility. Twin Towers 2. The rebuilding of the World Trade Center was plagued with compromise after compromise in trying to come up with a cohesive design, which is partially why it took so long to build. The project was passed between different architects and design firms, and requests by the NYPD and Silverstein Properties further hindered the finalization of the project. To make matters worse, the designs presented were not a hit with the general public in the same way as the original towers were. None were as outspoken about this as Donald Trump, who routinely appeared on major TV networks to criticize what was going to be called the Freedom Tower.
I'd rather have nothing than what they're building, Chris. It's a terrible design. It was designed by an egghead architect who really doesn't have a lot of experience in designing something like this. And it's just a terrible design. It's wrong angles. The worst of all, it's a skeletal building. And, if you look at it, what is it really? It's a 60-story building with a skeleton on top of it that goes 40 or 50 stories with nothing in between. And it's a disgusting design.
In May of 2005, Trump held a press conference at his very own Trump Tower, where he revealed plans for the Twin Towers 2, a near-exact replication of the original World Trade Center. The design was conceived by Herbert Belton, an architect of the original towers, and engineer Ken Gardner. The two began working on the design with a handful of other architects back in 2004. Self-proclaimed as a plan of the people, the Twin Towers 2 would have featured the same basic design as the original, minus a few alterations. The structure would have called for a stronger two-layered steel skin, larger windows, improved fireproofing, and the addition of 5 extra stories in both towers. A memorial site would have recreated the first 5 floors of the outer frame of the original towers using the original steel, with the victims' names etched in granite. It's almost an exact inverse of the memorial we ended up getting. Trump sponsored the design and attached his name to the project in the hopes of getting the attention of his good friend Larry Silverstein, but the project fizzled and was seemingly discarded in 2006 once the actual One World Trade Center began construction. While the appeal of the Twin Towers remains unmatched and the nostalgia for the original design is understandable, there's a reason why they chose a new design. The collapse of the towers was in part due to its own framework. It would have been a careless and dangerous idea to just rebuild a flawed design from the 1960s. I personally do not like the design of the complex today, but I understand why it is the way it is. Fun fact before we move on. Sometime on the morning of 9/11, Donald Trump called into UPN 9 News to voice his thoughts, as at that point he was still just a well-known architect in New York City. When he was asked if there was any damage to his tower on 40 Wall Street, he had this to say.
Well, it was an amazing phone call I made. 40 Wall Street actually was the second tallest building in downtown Manhattan, and it was actually, before the World Trade Center, was the tallest. And then when they built the World Trade Center, it became known as the second tallest, and now it's the tallest. And I just spoke to my people.
Shanksville bomb and lack of plane parts. This is in reference to the fact that the impact crater of Flight 93 seems relatively small, especially when compared to other historical plane crashes. Multiple theories speculate that the explosion and subsequent impact zone were created by a small bomb, a cruise missile, or something of similar magnitude. Indeed, Ziad Jarrah did state that he had a bomb aboard the plane, but these were thought by investigators to have been decoys. One thing to note is that many historical aircraft crashes were made more horizontally, often in attempts to land the plane as safely as possible. We know from the flight recorder, which was found at the crash site, that Flight 93 impacted in a very steep nosedive vertically, which would explain the differing appearances in the shape and size of the crater. As for the claim about the lack of plane parts, there are numerous evidence photographs of airliner pieces that were found at the field where Flight 93 crashed, including large chunks of the fuselage displaying the proper coloring of United Airlines planes at the time. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were also recovered in the crater, as well as an entire engine that had been buried underground upon impact. This evidence could be easily fabricated, I guess, but there doesn't appear to be any proof to support that. Pakistan hiding bin Laden. After Osama bin Laden was discovered and executed inside of his compound in Pakistan, an investigation began into whether or not the Pakistani government was actively harboring him in the country. His fully fortified residence was, after all, located just a half-mile from Kakul Military Academy, the best military training facility in the whole country. Not only that, but Leon Panetta, the director of the CIA during the first half of the Obama administration, stated that the United States had deliberately chosen not to share details about the raid of the compound with Pakistani officials, fearing that they would leak the info to him. Even the former ambassador to Pakistan, Hussein Haqqani, claimed that bin Laden had a secret support system set up within the country, although he believed that the government was unaware of its existence. Leaked documents from WikiLeaks claimed that many in Pakistan knew of bin Laden's whereabouts, but the documents don't go into any specifics. The government naturally denied any partnership with bin Laden or al-Qaeda and claimed that letting him set up base in the country was a blunder, an act of incompetence rather than involvement. An investigation began just weeks after the raids in 2011, but the report of their findings, named the Abbottabad Commission Report, was immediately classified by the Prime Minister for no discernible reason. Al Jazeera subsequently leaked it to the public in July of 2013. The reports concluded that, like the US before them, the exact level of incompetence ran deeper than expected. Quote, "It is a glaring testimony to the collective incompetence and negligence, at the very least, of the security and intelligence community in the Abbottabad area. How the entire neighborhood, local officials, police and security and intelligence officials all missed the size, the strange shape, the barbed wire, the lack of cars and visitors over a period of nearly 6 weeks beggars belief." The reports also revealed that bin Laden had apparently been living in Pakistan since 2002, hiding out in a number of locations before moving to the Abbottabad compound in 2005. 2005 was also conveniently the year the Pakistan Intelligence Division had stopped actively tracking him. While the report does not rule out the idea of individuals within the government providing a support system for terrorists, it does state that, quote, "Culpable negligence and incompetence at almost all levels of government can more or less be conclusively established." On the other hand, US intelligence suggested that Osama had little or no contact with the government of Pakistan, as hard drives and computers belonging to him contained anti-Pakistan documents and even plans to take out Pakistani military targets. In Steve Cole's book Directorate S, he claims bin Laden was actively suspicious of Pakistani police and officials due to their involvement with the previous capturing of KSM, and that no evidence linking him and the Pakistani government has been found. Layer 5. Lynch Radar Gap. As Flight 77 was being hijacked, it too had its transponder turned off, like with Flight 11. When this happened, air traffic control was monitoring the plane from within the airspace of the Higbee radar site, which was beacon only, meaning it could only track transponder signals and nothing else. This in itself was not a problem, due to the way that the radar sites themselves are set up. Airspace is split into what are known as radar sort boxes, with each box being assigned to oftentimes 2 radar sites, one primary and one supplementary. The computer that receives the radar data is trained to display only the active radar site within the sort boxes. When the Higbee site became unable to track Flight 77, coverage switched to the Lynch radar site, the assigned backup. Unfortunately, Lynch had notoriously shitty coverage. Many working at the Indianapolis Air Route Traffic Control Center were aware of the Lynch radar site's problems, yet the technical reason for this was never investigated. Because of this, at around 8:56 a.m., those tracking Flight 77 at Air Traffic Control lost the plane's precise altitude and location for a good 10 minutes. The Lynch radar picked the signal back up at 9:04 a.m., at which point the plane had finished its 180-degree turn back towards Washington, D.C. It has been questioned by some theorists whether or not the pilots deliberately chose to start the turn of the aircraft at this location. At that point, the controllers had apparently thought that the plane had crashed, which was not an unreasonable assessment with everything else going on. Had the aircraft not disappeared from view, those watching at air traffic control would have been able to spot the notable deviation from its course, and they may have been able to contact military personnel in time. Paul Schreier, a German-born author who submitted a paper for the independently published Journal of 9/11 Studies, says, quote, "If the military had received the call at 9 o'clock, Langley Air Force Base would have been able to get fighters in the air at about 9:15, and would have reached the plane then at approximately 9:27, about 10 minutes before it crashed. It is doubtful if a shoot-down order could have been issued by that time, but at least, and the following fact is constantly underestimated, the fighter pilots could have taken a deep look into the cockpit of the hijacked plane to see who was actually at the controls. This would have helped to confirm if it really was Hani Hanjour, the alleged pilot who reportedly could not even fly a Cessna safely, and whose presumed boarding is not backed by any airline check-in data." Okay. So first of all, this is kind of inaccurate considering that Hanjour appears on both the flight manifest of 77 and closed-caption TV footage from the airport itself, and at the same time, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, at that point, one of the tallest buildings in the West had been hit by a hijacked plane, and another was just minutes away from doing the same thing. If they're going to issue a shoot-down order, they're far beyond caring about those on board. They're not going to look through the cockpit windows to make sure it really was the guy they said it was. They're just going to take the plane down. It's arguing semantics at this point. Ukraine war propaganda. Another one of my own submissions. The most substantial find that 9/11 researchers have made since the start of the new decade was a new, truly remarkable clip of Flight 175 approaching and then impacting the south face of the South Tower. It's a striking, never-before-seen angle, and it was first uploaded to YouTube on February 24th, 2022. Which was coincidentally the day Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. Not surprisingly, many made the connection and took to the comments to call the video a CIA plant. There are additional bits of information to add to this claim, like how Kevin uploaded the video in the 2000s only to have accidentally left it privated until this very date, or how the original video description stated the year of upload was actually 2001 before YouTube had even existed, or like how Kevin Wesley has a very, very close relationship to both Boeing and the United States Air Force. So close, in fact, that he used to work at Area 51. Yes, that Area 51. I am not f***ing kidding you. You can see it for yourself, because he bizarrely chose to upload his entire career resume onto YouTube as part of his retirement ceremony, which you can also watch in full. The entirety of his YouTube channel reads like an ARG gone haywire. Video descriptions going from long rambling paragraphs to simple 5-word sentences, the low-quality Windows Movie Maker editing, the cryptic poems about serving in the Air Force. It is extremely sketchy for no good reason. The working narrative amongst theorists is that Kevin, as part of his work at Area 51, helped develop and test unmanned drone technology, which was then allegedly used by the government in the orchestration of 9/11. 20 years later, he feels guilty for the crimes he was complicit in, and now that he is a private citizen, he can now leave us secret clues as to who was really responsible. The clip of the South Tower impact was uploaded on that date to act as propaganda and a warning from the US to Russia saying, "We can do this again, and blame it on you this time," in order to justify a war effort. Except the unmanned spy plane technology was the Great Horned Owl Project, which was started by the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects activity in 2011. The original Horned Owl project, which is what I believe most of these videos refer to, was actually for a multi-sensor system to be placed on a small Beechcraft B-200 for use in searching for IEDs and weapons caches in Iraq. This system was used in Operation Iraqi Freedom in as late as 2006, the same missions that Kevin Wesley has been documented to have been on. So now the narrative makes less sense. Adding on to that, if Kevin was supposedly leaving secret clues that only a military insider would be able to crack, why would he do that on the same channel the US told him to put out propaganda on? None of it makes any sense one way or the other. Kevin's YouTube account is still up as of the writing of this video, so maybe one with more military knowledge than I can look through his videos and decipher for themselves what it all really means. Hurricane Erin.
Notice also the movement. It's moving toward the northwest, and if it were to keep on moving, it would be heading right toward Long Island and southern New England, but it's not going to do that.
Hurricane Erin was a Category 3 hurricane that was the longest lasting in the 2001 Atlantic hurricane season. It had been steadily building in severity since the start of September, with reports of 120-mile-per-hour winds. The storm passed close enough to Bermuda for the island to issue a hurricane warning and order the shutdown of many public transportation services, including the delay or cancellation of several flights in and out of Bermuda National Airport. What does any of this have to do with 9/11? Well, seeing as how the hurricane traveled up the East Coast throughout the first half of September, some have wondered what would have happened if Hurricane Erin had just been a little closer to New York City on the day of the attacks. Would we have seen planes at Logan, Newark, and Washington Dulles International airports be delayed? Would the Al-Qaeda plot be foiled by a spot of really bad weather? There's no way to actually prove or debate any of this, it's all just speculation, really. Not exactly much even the US government can do about a f***ing hurricane. It's doubtful the weather would be at its worst around the planned time of the attacks, but some part of me has this childlike idea that maybe the impending storm would somehow help to put out the fires in the World Trade Center before they fell down. Probably not, though.
International weather, well, don't know that we want to get into this because you have no way of getting there right now, but in days to come, of course, we'll keep
Prague Connection. That name almost sounds like a Jason Bourne big-budget thriller movie or something. This entry refers to a supposed meeting between Mohammed Atta and Ahmad Khalil Ibrahim Samir Alani, an Iraqi intelligence officer. The April 2001 meeting was first alleged by Czech officials shortly after the attacks, and was subsequently repeated by Vice President Dick Cheney in a Meet the Press interview in December of 2001.
It's been pretty well confirmed that he did go to Prague and he did meet with a senior official of the Iraqi intelligence service.
He would repeat this claim as the nation headed into war with Iraq, claiming that it was proof of the connection between Iraq and 9/11. After a year-long investigation by the FBI and a 2-year-long investigation by the CIA, it was determined that this claim was false. A purported letter written by the former chief of the Iraq Intelligence Service that mentions housing Atta and working with him was proven to be a forgery, and Atta was spotted on security cameras from a bank in Virginia Beach, which matches up with the timeline from the 9/11 Commission. Even al-Ani himself, once captured by the United States, claimed that he never met Atta and that he didn't know of any other Iraqi officials that did. The controversy here stems from the use of this rumor by members of the Bush administration attempting to justify the invasion of Iraq. One claim, originating from a classified CIA report, suggested that White House officials even proposed mentioning the Prague Connection in one of Bush's upcoming speeches. That idea was shot down pretty quickly. Committee Democrats wrote a letter in 2006 condemning the classification of the report and accused the CIA of protecting the White House, because the White House and the CIA have such a great history together. Eventually, later that same year, Cheney appeared again on national television and admitted the meeting had most likely never taken place. Benazir Bhutto and Bin Laden death theories. Benazir Bhutto, a two-time Prime Minister of Pakistan and then leader of the Pakistan People's Party, claimed in a 2007 interview with Al Jazeera that Osama bin Laden had been killed and that she knew the man who did it. She even gives the name of the executioner, Omar Sheikh, a Pakistani terrorist who was close associates to al-Qaeda.
He's a former military officer. He is someone that had dealings with Omar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden. Now I know.
A month after the interview on December 27th, Bhutto was assassinated by a jasus who was later revealed to have been sent by al-Qaeda themselves. In his book, Osama bin Laden, Dead or Alive, the late David Ray Griffin speculated that Bhutto might have misspoke, intending to refer to the American captive Daniel Pearl. The media at the time had been focusing on Omar Sheikh and his attempt to appeal his murder charges in the 2002 beheading of Pearl, and earlier in the interview, Bhutto does mention Pearl and one of the sons of Osama bin Laden. In addition, the next day on CNN, Bhutto allegedly stated, quote, "I don't think General Musharraf personally knows where Osama bin Laden is," suggesting that he was still alive. Nevertheless, this is just one of the many rumors suggesting that bin Laden had already been dead long before May of 2011. Reports of his sudden passing by way of an unidentified illness go back as early as December 2001. The Pakistani Observer ran a story from an alleged Taliban official who attended his funeral. The year of 2002 was filled with even more false leads and misinformation as the United States scrambled to locate him. His will was supposedly found, again dating to December 2001, but no one was able to verify if it was actually Osama who wrote it. There was also speculation that he was going into or had died from renal failure, taking a dialysis machine with him when he lived in Afghanistan. A Time magazine article published in 2008 claimed that bin Laden had been suffering from a long-term kidney disease, and that the CIA had given him, quote, "no more than 6 to 18 months to live." Hell, the CIA even closed their own unit focused on capturing him in 2006, citing a lack of solid information. When Barack Obama took office in 2009, he made the hunt for bin Laden a primary focus of his national security policy. At the same time, new video and audio tapes from Osama emerged from his hiding place with varying degrees of authenticity between them. While some showcase him speaking to the camera, resembling photos we've seen of him before, other tapes merely display old footage or still images over a recording of his voice speaking Arabic. We can't even confirm if that's his voice. In contrast to his heavy media presence, no photos or videos of his actual death have surfaced to this day because of the US government's insistence they remain classified. A clip of what is believed to be his bedroom in Pakistan, complete with his bloodstains, was broadcast on ABC, and The Guardian features a few other screen caps and images taken during the raid, but the footage from SEAL team members that was supposedly live-streamed directly to the White House Situation Room, which was also the time that this picture was taken of Obama and Hillary Clinton watching the raid, has yet to surface or be released to the general public. Omar al-Bayoumi. Omar is a Saudi national who allegedly had ties to 2 of the 5 men who crashed Flight 77, though the veracity of this claim is unclear. After attending the al-Qaeda conference in 2000, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midhar flew for the first time to the United States, where Omar helped them find a place to stay, and also provided transport and information on local flight schools. He also had connections to other known terrorist affiliates, according to records seized from his phone upon his arrest in 2001. Most infamously, Mudabib al-Sudairi, I know I got that name wrong, I'm so sorry, roommate to a logistics, no I'm not, wait a minute, I'm not sorry about this, he's a Mutaib al-Sudairi, roommate to a logistics facilitator working with bin Laden. spoke with Omar on 5 separate occasions around the time he first met the two Yahoos. It was rumored that his connections even ran as deep as the Saudi Intelligence Committee, but this is where things start to get very messy. The FBI, who were the ones tasked with investigating Omar, all came to wildly different conclusions the more they looked into it. A recently declassified report written in 2017 states that there is about a 50-50 chance that he had advanced knowledge of the attacks and knowingly participated in helping those responsible. He himself stated during his incarceration that he had no idea of the intentions of the two men and that he just wanted to help out some fellow Muslims. Indeed, KSM, mastermind behind the attacks, claimed he never knew about Omar or his stint in the operation. However, that does not explain the very real evidence of the phone records, plus witness testimony that he had been waiting for the two for hours prior to their arrival. If Omar had connections with both Saudi intelligence and al-Qaeda, this would implicate the Saudi Arabian government in the planning and execution of 9/11. Despite this, the official 9/11 Commission report and a separate investigation into Saudi involvement, known as Operation Encore, came to the same conclusion, that most evidence connecting the two was circumstantial evidence at best, and there was no real legal basis to accuse the entire country of Saudi Arabia. Omar himself was released from custody to return to Aston University in Birmingham before returning to Saudi Arabia. His current whereabouts are unknown. FBI roommate. This is related to the last entry. When al-Hazmi and al-Midhar first entered the United States, they would stay at the apartment Omar al-Bayoumi paid for. The two would later move out, however, and end up rooming with a fellow Saudi named Abdusattar Shaikh. Shaikh, unbeknownst to the men, was actually an FBI asset, and had every chance to report them to the FBI, but chose not to. He claims the two were introverted but not suspicious, saying he had no idea that they wanted to be pilots and that, like Omar before him, he had just wanted to help out fellow Middle Eastern students. Having been a retired English professor, he was used to taking in Arab students into his home in Lemon Grove, California, and saw this as more of the same thing. The joint inquiry into intelligence community activities before and after the terrorist of September 11th, 2001, that is quite a name. Anyway, that joint inquiry called Abdusattar Shaikh, quote, the FBI's best chance to uncover September 11th before it happened, which I don't think is entirely fair. As we've seen, unfortunately, the FBI itself was fraught with internal problems, and as such, even if they were made aware of the locations, it's doubtful they would even do anything about it anyway.
These men had visas to come to the United States, had entered the United States. We've got to have accountability in this system. And that failure is massive.
CIA withheld information. The CIA, unlike the FBI and other agencies in the field of U.S. intelligence, is an entirely independent organization, seemingly able to operate without much concern towards answering to any higher powers. JFK supposedly once said he wanted to, quote, splinter them into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds. So it's no surprise to me that the CIA would withhold information leading up to and after the events of September 11th. Remember the al-Qaeda conference that al-Hazmi and al-Midhar attended in 2000 just before flying over to the US? Well, as it turns out, the CIA had the Malaysian government conducting surveillance during the meeting on their behalf and were actively tracking the two terrorists around the time they would have been meeting with Omar. Richard A. Clarke, a former czar who worked for both the Bush and Clinton administrations, came forward with his allegations against the CIA in 2011. While he name-drops officials George Tenet, Cofer Black, and Richard Blee directly, he also claimed that closer to 50 officials in the CIA were responsible for not reporting the terror to the FBI and the State Department, despite multiple warnings. Had they been reported and placed on the State Department's terrorist watch list, the attacks could theoretically have been thwarted. Other such claims of information withholding by the CIA were made earlier in 2007, when a few former members of the 9/11 Commission accused them of destroying videotapes containing the interrogations of key al-Qaeda personnel. According to former executive director of the commission, Philip Zelikow, the panel made repeated requests for very detailed information about the interrogations, and that by not informing them about the tapes, they were violating the law. In both of these cases, much as we've seen before, nobody in the CIA was actually charged with anything, and these disturbing lapses in judgment and accountability were simply swept under the rug. Ptech. Ptech was a private software company focusing on business process modeling that had been contracted by the federal government within several agencies, including, but not limited to, the Armed Forces, the IRS, the FAA, the White House, Congress, the Department of Justice, the Secret Service, and even the FBI. It was believed that Ptech had access to very sensitive information, seeing as how their clientele spanned across many branches of government. This would be a very big problem when, in 2002, it was discovered that one of Ptech's investors was a man by the name of Yassin Abdullah Qadi, who had met bin Laden in 1979 and had been declared a sponsor of Benazir in 1999. Due to these connections, theorists speculate that Ptech could have acted as an involuntary intermediary between U.S. intelligence and al-Qaeda, with the terrorists using Ptech systems to obtain sensitive government information in order to properly pull off 9/11. However, again, the truth is much more muddled and complex than that. While Qadi did indeed meet with bin Laden, he claims that the visit was wholly unremarkable and denied being a terrorist. He even went against the international courts, demanding that he be taken off of their terrorist blacklists, a case which he would eventually win in 2008. In addition, while Ptech does work within various agencies in the United States government, there isn't evidence to suggest that the information each of them shared was interconnected between them all. Amidst the media frenzy, the company quickly reorganized itself and changed its name to Go Agile in 2003. The company's page now redirects to a website called Demandbase, which seems to serve more or less the same function as its previous iterations. NORAD Drills. Before the first plane would even be taken over on September 11th, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, were conducting several drill exercises involving their fighter aircraft. Global Guardian is an annual drill held by NORAD and the United States Strategic Command, in which the military tests their procedures and commands in the event of nuclear warfare. This is held in conjunction with Vigilant Guardian, a separate exercise conducted by NORAD itself, where the scenario changes regularly. That year, according to the 9/11 Commission report, the scenario was planned to be, quote, a bomber attack from the former Soviet Union, which similarly coincided with planned bomber exercises from the Russian 37th Air Army. This ultimately created some confusion when the actual attack began, which you can hear on the famous air traffic control tapes.
We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York, and we need you guys to, we need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise, not a test.
Meanwhile, at the National Reconnaissance Office, they too were conducting a drill in which they would simulate a plane crashing into their headquarters. No actual plane was to be used, but all training exercises within the U.S. military were cancelled once the FAA had relayed the news of the hijacked aircraft. Some have argued that these war games took focus and precious fighter jets away from the chaos that was taking place on the East Coast. On the contrary, General Ralph Eberhardt told the commission that it took as little as 30 seconds for everyone to adjust to the real-world situation, and that the drills actually made things faster because everyone was all in one place. Still, there are legitimate arguments to be made as to why fighter craft weren't scrambled to the area sooner. A document obtained from the 9/11 Commission details the training scenarios of Projects Global Guardian and Vigilant Guardian from 1998 leading up to September 11, 2001, and there are many, many instances where there was supposed to be training to deal with terrorists or the of airliners. Again, this seems more like an act of incompetence rather than a deliberate act of sabotage, but it is interesting to speculate on just what may have happened if fighter aircraft had been able to reach the plane in time. Project for a New American Century. Do you know what exactly a think tank is? It's essentially a political nonprofit, a committee of researchers and advocates unified around a central topic, like social issues, economics, technology, and so on. Some can be wholly academic in nature, while others can be very biased and driven by political or corporate interests. This is one of the latter types of think tanks.
There's nothing to hide. We have nothing that's sort of nefarious behind what we do.
In 1997, the Project for the New American Century was founded by former Chief of Staff Bill Kristol and a neoconservative foreign policy advisor named Robert Kagan. The organization's motives stemmed from the fact that, in the opinions of Kristol and Kagan, the Republican Party had no clear foreign policy agenda. By developing a compelling plan, they could legitimize their complaints towards the Clinton administration. PNAC, as it began to be known, published numerous articles and opinion pieces calling for a return to an aggressive neo-Reaganite approach to foreign affairs. They repeatedly called for regime changes in Iraq, the fighting and winning of, quote, multiple simultaneous major theater wars, and a general push for American dominance in the global market by maintaining a strong military presence. Many of the individuals who had signed their Statement of Principles in 1997 would later go on to hold office in the George W. Bush administration, such as Deputy National Security Advisor Elliot Abrams, Bush's younger brother Jeb, former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, and even Dick Cheney, Bush's VP. In 2000, the organization published a report titled Rebuilding America's Defenses, which was seen by critics as advocating for total American hegemony. One section of the report became particularly notorious after the 9/11 attacks, which says, quote, further, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. While the wording is fairly vague, many point to this as evidence that those in the Bush administration had been planning the events of September 11th for years. The report is indeed the epitome of the modern-day manifest destiny that many neoconservatives have adopted, but do I believe it's proof of an inside job? No, not really. Notice how George W. himself did not sign the Statement of Principles in 1997, nor did he contribute to the think tank in any way. Those members of his administration that were involved with it may have seen an opportunity for war and seized it, but I think it's disingenuous to say that this is conclusive evidence of deliberate collusion. It means basically that Bush was probably caught way off guard and was most likely manipulated into military action in Iraq by those who had a preconceived agenda, which is already what I believed anyway. So, nothing much has really changed. Hello everyone. I originally intended for this to be just a two-part series, but I've been absent for quite a while on YouTube and I figured that it was good to get content out, so I'm splitting this up into 3 parts. Part 3 will be out, I have no idea when, and I hope this will be enough to keep you guys satiated for now. So just please be patient with me, bear with me as I essentially try to restructure my life again. I thank all of you for your support and your nice comments on the last video, as well as my community posts. And yeah, see you guys in part 3 when we talk about some real crazy shit.